Hotel in the 60s, but I think it was there. I think it was in the public parking lot, because I can remember taking a political candidate down to shake hands on a Saturday, because what would you do? The factory wasn't running. There wasn't a factory to go visit. And so we went to the farmer's market. But I remember that from the 60s. And then actually, Nelson Tisdale came to John Riecker and said, the farmers, Nelson was our state rep, but he was also a farmer, retired farmer. The farmers really would like someplace to sell their stuff, and something a little nicer than what they have. And John came to the Dow Foundation. I must have been a trustee by then, but he actually worked for them before I did, and said the farmers really need this and they need some improvement. And I think the first time we gave them money, it was something like $25,000 to build the farmers market. And then Alden, of course, did what is there now.
Well, the farmers market and the trees and all the parklands.
And Carl Gerstacker was the man who was really responsible for the tridge.
Yeah.
And in fact, he went to all the grade schools and asked every kid to give a penny. And ultimately, they got, I think, close to $80,000 from the kids in grade school, or their families, obviously.
Well, that reminds me of something, if I can interject. When Randy mentions Carl Gerstacker, one thing I meant to mention about when I first came to town was that the Dow executives were the rock stars. They really were.
Yeah.
They really were. Now, this may make you laugh now, but they were such wonderful men. They were all men. I will comment on that later. But
No, I'm going to ask Gary a question on that later.
Yeah, please ask me. But they were all so highly regarded, and everybody knew or thought they knew their personalities. People had opinions about them, but all good. I mean, there was no reason that I have ever known for any criticism, as a matter of fact. But it was many of the early Dow executives were part of the family, the Dow family, and close friends, and there were people who married each other and what have you, so there became cousins and what have you. But you know, Dow wasn't all that old. We think of it as being forever and ever, but actually, my husband Bill knew a number of the people who were originally involved with Herbert Henry Dow. And well, one of the interesting stories that Bill tells is about going over to visit Veda Dow, that would be Alden Dow's wife, her dad, Mr. Bennett. And it seems that there was some reason why Dow needed to know when the trademark for the Dow Diamond trademark was first used in Germany. And everyone seemed to think that Earl Bennett would probably know, and they sent young Bill Barker over to talk with him because Mr. Bennett had known Bill, and his sight was failing, but he would recognize Bill's voice. So that's how it happened that Bill went over. Sat down, chatted, this and that, and finally Bill said, Mr. Bennett, Earl, I have to track down when that Dow Diamond trademark was first used in Germany. And Earl Bennett looked just kind of stricken for a minute. And he said, you know, Bill, I can't tell you. He said, I know that it was after Christmas in 19 whatever. I said, because I had paid off the mortgage in the house, and I know it was before Veda's birthday, but he said, I can't tell you the day. He was absolutely stricken that he couldn't tell Bill the day. It was the most remarkable story.
I think there's something else that I've always enjoyed about those people. He wasn't Earl Bennett, he was E.W. Bennett.
Oh, that's
and
right.
He was always referred to as...
Pardon me, you're right.
And Mr. Barstow
E.O.
was
Barstow.
E.O. Barstow.
Yeah, that's right.
And Dr. Stroh was, and I can't... C.J. or C.W.
C.J. Stroh.
And Herbert Dow, of course, was H.H. And somebody finally made the comment, and it was part of a eulogy at a funeral. I don't know if those men really had first names.
Oh, and that's right. Aunt Randy is absolutely right about that. I'd forgotten about that. That was cute. But these people were highly regarded, and people felt as though they were part of the family. I mean, I really think people felt a very collegial, felt as though they were part of that whole Dow Chemical family.
If you talk to some of the generation of older widows,
Yeah.
not me,
No.
but the older widows, and and they really still miss when really and truly, virtually all the Dow board worked for Dow, lived in Midland, and that's a huge change.
That is a big change. Yeah.
Well, both being very dynamic women, when you came to Midland, did you try to get involved in politics in Midland? Was that a guy, or how did you break that through that class?
I'll let
I
her go
don't think
first on
I
that
ever
one.
would have gotten involved in politics. When I came to Midland, the first organization I joined was the Theater Guild, and that was the one the one that wasn't under the Dow umbrella, as a matter of fact, but that wasn't why. But no, when John got a job, it was for the state senator, and we moved in May, and along came the fall, and getting close to the election, and the local Republicans had promised the state Senate and the state House candidates money, but they didn't have any money, so literally John and the other partner, Floyd Wetmore, went up and down Main Street with their hats in hand raising money, and I guess I got involved about that same time, not necessarily raising money, but as a volunteer, and sort of went on from there to end up on the Republican National Committee for 12 years.
What a wonderful opportunity.
But it was very exciting. That was my life before foundations.
Well, I made a mention earlier that one of our photographs we have in the Voices exhibit shows you and your mother and Gerald Ford together.
Exactly.
It's a great photograph. You're all very smiling and laughing. It's just a great informal moment.
A very great man, and I think he's just beginning to be appreciated for all those, because he really, and I think he was the last major elected official, he sacrificed his own career to do what he thought was right for the country. If you don't know, when Richard Nixon resigned before he was impeached, Ford had been appointed vice president when Nixon's vice president that he'd run with had to retire for various reasons, and not health. So Jerry Ford was appointed vice president, and then when Nixon retired very quickly, he suddenly became president, and he was the only unelected president we've ever had in this country, actually. But he pardoned Nixon. He got us out of the Vietnam War. Those were maybe two of the biggest things. And by doing that, he basically sacrificed any other political career he would ever have.
But not a bad choice.
Not a bad
though.
choice.
No, not a bad choice. And
that was in the days of civility, too.
Yeah, it was. In fact, one of my dear friends is a woman named Elaine Didier, and she is actually the executive director of the Gerald Ford Museums. And she has an interesting job because there are the Gerald Ford Libraries at the University of Michigan, where Ranny and I went to school. And then,
I didn't go to Michigan. I never
Oh,
went
you
to Michigan.
didn't?
Just high school, just grade school and high school.
Oh my gosh,
the
I always
lab
think
school.
of you as like the pillar. It's because I sat in the press box at that enormous Michigan Stadium and watched this woman get an honorary degree from the University of Michigan. So to
That's
me,
my Michigan
so you did
degree.
graduate from Michigan.
That's my Michigan degree,
But,
yeah.
but
Thank
what
you.
I was going to say is my friend Elaine is the director of the Gerald Ford Museums. It's the only presidential library of the 11 that exist in the United States that has 2 locations. And she splits her time between Grand Rapids and the museum and the library in Ann Arbor, and is a woman who's on the road a lot. But speaking of Mr. Ford, we have one son, Mark, and he went out to seek his fortune out west, and he was living in Arizona, and his life wasn't going so well at one time, and he said, Mom, I think I want to come back to Midland. He said, everybody in the Midwest is so normal. And that's what I think of with Gerald Ford when you were telling those stories.
Yeah,
he was just a normal guy, I think. But I was going to say about when I didn't get involved in politics so much. I got involved in a lot of the hospital auxiliary guilds and all because I had been involved with that, and I worked with a man in a company from Chicago, and we wrote a series of children's books about children being hospitalized, which were published way back in the 1960s, and that was interesting. But I guess that my story is more one of how voluntary work can lead to a job. You just never know. I think that's one of the reasons that why both Randy and I would encourage you to get involved in anything, in volunteer work, because it makes so many connections. And I was involved really early when Arthur Turner and Gary Stauffer came to town, and they founded Northwood, what was Northwood Institute, now Northwood University. And their idea was to take young people who may have had not so much great direction in life and get them ready for a world of work. It was as simple as that. And they were going to actually ask business people what they needed in their employees, which was actually not done so much by the kinds of colleges and universities that the rest of us had attended. It was a really exciting and dynamic kind of an idea. And the town really got behind it, but not always. When it first started, why, as Randy will remember too, why it wasn't such a popular idea to have another college going up in town, because Delta College was just being thought about and founded. And that's another difference. When Randy and I came to town, there was no Delta College, there was no hospital the way we know it. I'll go back to say
Actually, there was no, Tri-City Airport wasn't this big.
No, that's right. But anyhow, back to Northwood for a minute. Why, they started a group called Town and Campus.
And they played bridge.
And they played bridge. In fact, I want you to know, I am so proud of this. I was the chair of their first fashion show. Yes.
I remember that.
Remember
in
that?
the country club.
Thank you, the country club. We made $300. And one of the early pioneers, as was just mentioned, was E.O. Barstow. And Phoebe Barstow came to me afterward when we announced that we'd made $300. And she said, "Oh, Nancy, anything you touch just turns to gold." And I have treasured that compliment. I was about 28 years old or something when this happened. It was a long time ago. And I've treasured that compliment my whole life. $300. A lot of money.
You brought up Phoebe.
Yeah.
She played first violin in the Midland Symphony Orchestra.
Amazing woman.
And she was there for years. I can remember seeing her on stage. I mean, this is a Dow director's wife.
Yep. Yeah.
So many of the Dow directors and leadership of Dow, their spouses were very involved.
They were totally involved in the community.
Well, I always thought of Midland as a science town because of Dow Chemical and Dow Plumbing. But there's as much science here as there is culture and sports opportunities. Well, what are your takes on that? What do you?
Well, now I'm going to quote somebody else that is one of the older generation, who's Etzel Blair, who is a retired research scientist from Dow, and his comment was, after I got out of college, I had to decide whether I was going to be a professional musician, classical music, or whether I was going to be a chemist. And I heard about Dow and that they had a symphony orchestra, and so that's why I came to Dow, because I could do both things that I loved. And I'm finding, as I deal with colleges and universities today, that there is a very much acknowledged association between particularly math and sciences and music, but all of the arts and the really great desire to have that creative part. I know we feel strongly about the center today that it is truly one of the number one, or the library's number one, and being safe streets, but the Center for the Arts is very high in their attractions for people coming to Midland, that when wives particularly come in and see that's one of the selling points.
We have so many organizations that are such surprises to people. You go out to the Nature Center, you go to the Center for the Arts, you go to the Center for the Community Center. The facilities here are much more involved and much more large than you would find in a town of 40,000.
Well, I was going to just jump in on that one too, because I made myself probably a little unpopular a couple of months ago when the head of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation was here in Midland speaking at the Chamber of Commerce, and we always go to those excellent chamber meetings. And I bravely stood up because he was talking about what would attract people to businesses, and he had made a remark that I thought was a little, it wasn't at all derisive, but it just was a little dismissive of the Center for the Arts, and it didn't mean it that way, but I, of course, am the defender of the arts here, so I couldn't keep quiet, and I stood up and I said, I think that people, of course, they're looking for a workforce that's trained, and of course they're looking for the economic, factors that will make their business, effective. I said, but you know, you also have to attract people to a town that people want to live in. It's the quality of life that they're going to have for themselves and their families. So I don't think anybody ever should shortchange the importance of things like nature centers and parks and centers for the arts and what have you. We are a very lucky town. However, I want to get back to women because I realized I got babbling on and didn't finish my comment on Northwood. The reason I was hired there was that I had been the chair of this town and campus organization. And one day, Arthur Turner and Gary Stauffer came to me and said, Nancy, we have 11 men students for every woman on campus, for every girl. A business management college was simply not attracting young women. And so they wanted me to come out and see if I could help do something about that. And again, this was many years ago, almost 50 years ago now. In fact, it was 50 years ago now. And so I did. I didn't know that I couldn't do it, and I asked a lot of people's advice, and we did actually. We turned the whole thing around. We started a group called Careers for Women. It had programs that had women who were in business in the different professions come and speak, and it all went very well. And I have to be honest with you, they all thought I was a little genius, and it was just wonderful because everything changed, and we had like 50-50 men and women at Northwood, and it's been pretty much that way since. But I got to be honest. It was the women's movement. 1970s, it was going to happen whether I was there or not. However, I'm happy to take the credit.
Take the credit.
We've got a few minutes more before we turn some crowd and some questions. Randy, I'd like to ask you